What is up, YouTube? Welcome back to the Treehouse Brewing Company YouTube channel, where we're going to try two different Treehouse beers that bridge the gap between two Treehouse eras in very meaningful ways. Oh yeah, soft, rounded fruits, white wine, early harvest characteristic of that Nelson. We could not be more delighted to be coming to you in your home or on your phone from this marvelous location. Myself and the guys have had an amazing hike today. We've had an amazing start to our trip, and to kick things off, I want to talk about two beers. One beer is an older Treehouse beer, and the next beer was just released in the last couple of weeks, and hopefully by the time you see this video, is still available. The first beer that I want to talk about is Harmony. Harmony is a Nelson brewed IPA, first introduced by Treehouse in 2014 and not canned once again for nearly a decade following that original batch. This beer was made and brewed in a time at Treehouse that was very different from the Treehouse that we know now. And more importantly, this wonderful label featuring Mount Cook, Mount Aoki, Maori as it's called, when we put it on the label, we had never actually experienced this view as we see here before, but now we're here for the second time feeling really in tune with this space and what it presents for us and how it makes us feel and the energy that we give to the beers that we brew. Second beer that I would like to talk about is brand new. It's called Ivory Cloud, and it contains hops that are grown not too far down the road at Garston and also a little ways down the road in Nelson by our friends at Freestyle Hops. Ivory Cloud is a much newer expression of Treehouse hoppy beer. It's much more progressive. You should give them a shot if you're visiting Treehouse soon. All right, so Harmony. Harmony was first made at a time when Treehouse was a very different brewery. I got my hands on Nelson Sauvin early on. It was a very hectic time for us. We were learning at a light speed pace, just making beer after beer after beer. In fact, when it was introduced back in 2014, that was one of the most important creative periods of Treehouse's history. We introduced haze around that time, we introduced double shot, we introduced juice machine, and many more in that nascent period that kind of made us who we are. And as part of that, we used this hop that was from a magical place that we had never journeyed to, and frankly, we didn't know too much about. So the way that this beer was brewed kind of incorporated the knowledge that we had for a more forward, progressive, fruity, American-style hops. So the Treehouse style IPA that you're super familiar with is ingrained within this beer, Harmony. Now, the second beer I want to kind of talk about is Ivory Cloud. Ivory Cloud is at the bleeding edge of what Treehouse does, and it represents the very best of what we're capable of, in my opinion. So I want to articulate the difference between Harmony and Ivory Cloud and why I think it's interesting for you, the drinker, and the viewer. Harmony's a more nascent, maybe perhaps naive rendition of a Nelson-style beer, whereas Ivory Cloud contains the travel, insight, knowledge, relationships gained, brewing knowledge, trials and tribulations that we've gained over the past couple of years of travel to this magical place. And frankly, it's just a step in an amazing direction that is wholly inspired by these surroundings that we find ourselves in today. So what's the flavor difference between these two? Let me explain. Harmony is much, much softer and hopped at a much lower rate than a beer like Ivory Cloud. We use around 3 pounds per barrel in this guy. We definitely use a little bit of crystal malt. So it's gonna pour with a little bit more orange characteristic in your glass. It's gonna be a little bit softer and more rounded and not have that super punchy passion fruit, tropical fruit, late harvest Nelson characteristic that you get in some of the newer Treehouse IPAs. It's a beautiful experience. It's a different experience that kind of represents a different part in Treehouse's history. Ivory Cloud, on the other hand, is a little more bleeding edge. This guy's hopped at a much higher rate, almost 2.5 times the rate of Harmony. It's made without the inclusion of crystal malt, so it has a much more opaque and yellow appearance, and it has that super, super juicy, tropical, wonderful Nelson/New Zealand characteristics that we have fallen in love with by spending time in places like this magical place that I sit in right now. So without further ado, you've waited this long. Thank you for your patience. Let's give these babies a try. Oh, taste the Arokis, as they say here at Mount Cook. Oh yeah, soft, rounded fruit. It's got that soft white wine, early harvest characteristic of that Nelson. Just well-rounded, sweet, not aggressively hopped, really just pleasant to drink all around. Doesn't have that super punchy modern tropical characteristic, but man, if it doesn't have that renowned, iconic treehouse softness and bubblegum characteristic just wrapping itself up in that Nelson, man, it's wonderful. Oh, man, I talk a lot on the channel about having a beer like this in a moment like this and how it heightens the experience. It's the reason that Treehouse exists. I'm glad you guys are here with me right now. This is an awesome moment. You know, all the teams over there waiting for me to wrap this up so we can celebrate this moment together. Before we do that, I'm going to take a sip of Ivory Cloud. If I were to pour these guys into a glass next to each other, one would be a little bit more translucent, a little bit more orange, not much, whereas this guy would be pretty opaque, pretty yellow, and pretty milky looking. Yeah, I can kind of see the milk in through the open here. Oh, baby. Yeah, I mean, pungency is the name of the game here. Intensity, hop saturation. Wow. Oh, Ivory Cloud. It's like drinking Nelson, Waimea, and Rakau syrup. And it's just tropical and juicy and fruity, passion fruit. Again, a little bit of that treehouse bubblegum character reminding you which beer you're drinking. You know, one of the things that stood out for me in our last journeys to New Zealand when we were designing this label is you get these wonderful little puffy clouds. So we had this idea to name it Ivory Cloud. Just lone clouds that make their way through the sky are very common here, and this label kind of gives homage to this very moment that we're experiencing right now together. All right, friends at home, thank you guys for hanging out with me. I hope that you're well. I hope you get subscribed to the channel because we have much more in the New Zealand journey where this came from. Thanks for hanging out, and be good.